have now been waved on by Hank. So, welcome to today's meeting this afternoon. We have another fantastic speaker, and Charlene will be introducing him in just a moment. I would like to welcome you and to remind you that our next meeting is March the 7th with Ellen Kaiser from the museum, from the Eric Carle Museum. We don't know if we'll be able to do a broadcast from the museum or if we will be here, but it will be by Zoom. The next date after that is March 19th, and that is the flower show here at the house, Saturday, March 19th, 10 to 2. Tickets are $5 each, and you will be getting some to sell or buy and give to your friends. We also have a raffle in process, and we just had a little ad hoc meeting with those of you who are on Zoom already, and hopefully we will be able to take a little extra time and draw the raffle winning ticket at our annual meeting. That's to be discussed. So that's all I have to say. If anybody has any questions, just send me a text or an email. Lots of minds can figure out lots of things. So let me know what you're thinking about all this. And here is Charlene to introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Here we are again. I'm very pleased today to introduce you to Steve Strymer of the Levelers Press. Steve will be talking about his nearly 50 years in the printing business, as well as his founding of Levelers Press and the fascinating story of how that name came to be. Following his talk, Steve will be happy to answer questions you will have about Levelers' unique approach to publishing and the help it can provide self-publishing authors. Please join me in welcoming Steve Strymer to the Amherst Women's Club.
Hello, everybody. Thanks to Charlene and everyone who allowed me to do this, and I've taken the opportunity to do it a little differently than you might expect, so here we go. I turned 72 last week, and with my 50th college reunion at Amherst coming up, I've slipped into a rare nostalgic mood. The opportunity offered by Charlene and all of you inspired me to go back, all the way back, to see how I remember it and explain how Levelers Press came to be. We'll be sure to save time at the end for questions about publishing at Levelers and Off the Common books. Marietta Pritchard, my co-worker during the early days of the Gazette's Hampshire Life, wrote these kind words 35 years later. She may not remember I had moved from the press room to paste up by then. Steve Strymer may not literally have printer's ink in his veins, but he comes about as close as you can get. I first knew him as a lively, funny, somewhat subversive presence at the Gazette in the late 70s. I was a new editorial recruit, and he was working in the press room as a backup camera operator in the days before everything was done on computers. After graduation with a degree in studio art, I had few prospects. I decided to stay put in the Valley. The first place I applied was the Gazette. I started at $2.70 an hour. I think you can pick me out in this in the center of this 1973 photo. Marietta goes on. After leaving the Gazette, Steve followed his progressive leanings to co-found a worker cooperative, Aldebaran Press, which became Commonwealth Printing. Then in 1997, he joined Collective Copies as a worker owner, where he still works. But well before those career moves, a photo clipped from a 1960 Delaware, Ohio newspaper shows a 10-year-old Steve already displaying his commitment to print. He sits at a typewriter surrounded by a bunch of other kids. They're putting out their neighborhood paper. We used a hectograph to produce the Westgate Dispatch. Does anyone remember this printing method? You'd press a mimeograph type master onto a special gel in a flat tray, then pull 50 or so impressions until the purple ink was too light to read. We published such riveting lead stories as this. The children of Westgate Drive have recently visited Mr. Haycock's studio in order to play a large flute. The flute is 8 feet long. It was a pipe in a church organ. The sound is like a Viking horn. Mr. Haycock says he would like to use the horn to call the children for lunch and supper, but it takes more air than he has in him. High school was all about sports, girls, grades, and getting into Amherst College. During my brother Bob's 1965 commencement weekend, when I first beheld the Holyoke Range from the War Memorial, I knew exactly where I wanted to be. All these years later, I worked 2 doors down from the fraternity house I pledged in 1969. Some of you may remember what it was like in Amherst in those days. Spring of my freshman year saw the close of classes for the moratorium, the takeover of the administration building in support of the Afro-American Society, and Jim Steinman's Dream Engine rock opera. Then, of course, there was Woodstock that summer. That fall, upperclassmen who knew him were stunned to learn that Marshall Bloom had committed suicide. Bloom, an award-winning editor of the Amherst Student, had made national news leading a walkout to protest Defense Secretary Robert McNamara's speech at Amherst 1966 commencement. In 1967, Bloom co-founded the Liberation News Service, which provided content to up to 250 underground and student newspapers across the country. Their publication was printed on a press they named Little Johnny, and which the virtuous caucus purloined from the vulgar Marxists, moving it clandestinely from New York to Montague in a dramatic split between SDS and back to the birth factions. Members of the Montague Farm Commune became central figures in the spread of the New Age and New Left ideology in Western Mass and beyond. Those of you interested in how the Valley became what it is today would enjoy reading LNF co-founder Ray Mungo's Famous Long Ago, completed before Bloom's death but published afterward, and Montague Farm co-founder Steve Diamond's What the Trees Said. In 1975, after 2 years at the Gazette, I left to join the rock band Bridge Street. Lived in a farmhouse in Orange with 12 or so folks, a steer named Meat, and a 57 Chevy panel truck to haul our equipment. I soon tired of the bars we had to play to stay afloat. I left the band to start Aldebaran Press in 1977, intending to publish journals and books from the dense community of astrologers inhabiting the Valley, which had come fully into the new age Bloom and Diamond had envisioned. Here's the Astrologers Guild, circa 1978. We taught classes, gave lectures, and had a lending library above where Fresh Pasta used to be in Northampton. I found part-time work back at the Gazette, and where we were allowed to make our printing plates and use the big paper cutter, with the owner endorsing our first loan. I had contacted a printer friend of my father's who said he had a press for me. I was thinking small press, maybe a multi-lit 1250, like the LNS folks had. Instead, he virtually gave me a 22-inch Royal Zenith jobber capable of printing small books and 16-page signatures. We bought a house in Haydenville, built a barn for the press, and lived like a rock band with our friends. Around 1980, Bob Gardner joined Martha Yoder and I, steering us in a more political direction. We printed for unions, food co-ops, the anti-nuke movement, and justice in Central America. We sold the house, moved to 47 East Street in Hadley, rebranded ourselves as Commonwealth Printing, and organized as a Massachusetts 157A worker cooperative corporation, one of the first states in the country to have such a statute. We grew to 14 workers at our peak. Here's Martha, Bob, and I at the beginning, and the press room in Hadley by 1993. In 1987, we co-founded the Progressive Printers Network with Salcedo Press of Chicago, Omega Press of Philly, Orange Blossom Press of Cleveland, Red Sun Press of Boston, Inkworks Press of Berkeley, and Community Printers of Santa Cruz. We held our first national convention in Cleveland and the next one in Berkeley. Here we are in California, where they didn't need air conditioning. The PPN's final convention was held in San Francisco, September 8th through the 10th, 2001. Flying back to Boston the night of the 10th, we must have been at Logan around the time the hijackers arrived. By spring 1997, it had all gotten to be too much for me. In spite of ourselves, Commonwealth had become hierarchical, with a small board running the show, with press operators paid more than anyone else, with an office manager and a production manager, me. During a board meeting where I was accused of not being a can-do guy because I refused to oversee a big job we needed to outsource because our aging equipment couldn't handle it, I stormed out. Walking briskly to the office, a call came through for me at that moment. It was Stephen Roy at Collective Copies asking me if I wanted to work there. When can I come over, I said, for something close. I already had a degree of envy for Collective Copies. We knew they made a decent wage, largely through the course reader business that buried them twice a year. They also made decisions together by consensus. There was no hierarchy at all. All were paid the same, except for the differences in seniority and at profit sharing time by hours worked. Collective Copies cleared more copyrights for these packets than any other copy shop in the state. Some 120 comb-bound books, some of them huge. As that part of our business kept growing, we leased and purchased 2 Xerox Docutechs, each capable of printing at 135 copies per minute, allowing us to pull off all that printing in 2 weeks, twice a year. Then within 3 years, it all went away, except for a few die-hard professors. Publishers who once actively pursued the vendors who failed to obtain copyright now allowed a generous chunk of the work to be downloaded for free as fair use. By that time, the business had grown to 11 coworkers, and we knew we had to do something. Thankfully, color copying was advancing by leaps and bounds, but that wasn't going to be enough. In 1999, a plan emerged to start a new shop in Florence, the first stop for Hilltowners coming down for errands in Northampton, and itself an underserved market. We purchased the building right next to Miss Florence Diner and the Florence Savings Bank, rented out office space, and quickly became very busy and fairly profitable. Soon, 3 changes in our industry created new opportunities. Black and white printers had typically been at 300 dots per inch, allowing for decent but not great grayscale printing. The new machines started at 1200 DPI and could print on 12 by 18 paper for one 8.511 surface click. The name of the game in our business. I say that because the service clicks are really what your costs are in a copy shop. A machine actually adds just another penny per copy to, a lot of them add only a penny a copy to a copy. It's what they charge you to maintain these machines, which are made out of plastic, unlike the presses that we had back at home. The one we had, we called Rico Suave, and have named all our machines ever since. We printed our first real books on this machine. The 6-book series for the Northampton Historical Commission in celebration of the 350th in 2004. They still sell very well 14 years later. Additionally, click prices on color machines were going down, while marked improvements were made in paper handling, image quality, and speed. The Acrobat PDF files we all use now became more and more stable and dependable. It was its own kind of new age in printing. We were now at 2400 DPI in color and printing on 13 by 19 sheets, again for one service click. The moment had arrived. We could now print standard 6 by 9 books, 4 at a time, making each book much more affordable for our customers and pay a decent royalty to our authors. We held a workshop on self-publishing under these new conditions. Afterward, Professor Vincent Cleary of UMass asked whether we might actually publish his book, Amherst, Massachusetts, 01002, one of the best small towns in America. By publishing, he meant, and we now mean, collective copies was to take all the upfront risk. That is, layout and design of the book, registering the ISBN, as well as helping with the rollout of the title. Having no experience in the field of publishing, we early settled into our own model. Give each book our 100-count pricing for printing and binding, then set the retail price at approximately $10 above that and start selling. We got all the money generated by the sales until the upfront costs were paid off. Then split that $10 surplus 50-50 with the author. Seemed like a very simple and understandable way to do business. We were not yet Leveler's Press. Our first 6 books came out as collective copies titles, including Daniel Shea's Legacy, Marshall Bloom, Radical Insurgency in the Pioneer Valley by Amy Stevens, which added new material to his often told story. Then came Bob Romer. I had met him at historic Deerfield, where he was volunteering as a docent at the Ashley House after a long professorship in physics at Amherst College. He had a book entitled Slavery in the Connecticut Valley of Massachusetts, based on what he'd learned about the street in Deerfield. It established for the first time that Deerfield was 8% enslaved Africans in 1755, that they were referred to as mere property and were rented out to neighbors during the year. None had last names. None had known burial sites. Romer was the one that suggested we find a name for our publishing wing, collective copies being too flip a name for a proper publisher. I had heard about the Levelers in England, who fought in Cromwell's time for the common man and religious toleration, and it had a good ring to it, even a sort of double entendre, since our intention was to level a playing field that increasingly favored already established authors. That was that. And confirming the decision, I learned shortly thereafter that one of the principal Leveler writers was Richard Overton, the name of my maternal grandfather, supplying me a middle name and the initials SOS. He was also the printer of nearly 100 of their tracts, including 50 of his own writing, including this one from prison after his arrest on August 12, 1646. Lest you get the impression we only publish lefty political works, from the beginning we planned to have an eclectic catalog of local authors. Our second title was Caring for Dying Loved Ones, a helpful guide for families and friends by Joanna Brown. To close, I'll choose an early Leveler's Press title, one for which we arranged to take over the copyright. No Bosses Here, a manual on working collectively, first published in 1976 by Vocations for Social Change in Boston. This was our go-to handbook in the earliest days of Aldebaran Press. We are pleased to bring it to a new generation of worker cooperators, and we'll keep it in print for as long as we're in business, along with our other 105 Levelers and 150 off the common book titles. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. Let's see if we have any questions here. All right.
Okay, folks, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll put your question in the chat for Steve. Unmute yourself first.
I have a question, if I may. Yeah. How do you determine which manuscripts will take on and publish? Want to repeat the question?
The question was, how do we determine which manuscripts we take on for publishing? In the beginning and through most of the life of the press, I would vet the manuscripts myself. And then gradually over time, my coworkers wanted to democratize Leveler's Press, which I welcomed and didn't welcome. Yeah, I enjoyed this back and forth with the authors, trying to get it going and publishing the things I wanted, but they convinced me we wanted to make it a more democratic kind of thing. So we ended up with a publishing committee, and we would give ourselves oftentimes 3 months to read a manuscript. Those who were interested in that particular title might advocate for it. And then we would have the publishing committee, subcommittee, come to a consensus about which ones to come out with. And early on, we were building the business, the catalog. One year we did 12 titles in a year, one a month, which was very busy. And I became concerned we wouldn't be able to give each title its due. That is one of the problems. I'll stick with your question before I digress. So I think the criterion is, because we don't publish much fiction, the criterion for my kind of manuscripts is that it's well written, and I'll say maybe doesn't need too much editing, but and also that it provides a niche, a kind of it satisfies a hole in what we know about the Pioneer Valley, and adds to our story, because we consider ourselves really a local publisher. Only 2 of our authors have been from out of the valley, out of Western Mass. And because we firmly, and I firmly, right back to when I was 14, at my brother's commencement, that this place is very special. And there's a lot of worthy books that go unpublished or turn out to be something their authors didn't envision because of how editors work them over.
Okay, we have a question from Dorothy Pan.
That's okay. So, take the one up on there.
So I had a couple of questions. How many submissions do you generally get a year? And the author does not pay for the printing, but may not ever get any royalties. Is that correct?
So I would say we get close to 20 titles pitched to us a year in that neighborhood. It varies. The message may have gone out by now that we're accepting fewer titles than we used to, partly because I'm getting old. And I've decided I only want it for myself because we have a publishing committee, any of whom could champion a book, right? That I'm championing only the ones that really excite me. So that's where I'm at. And then, what was the rest of the question? The
Expenses.
model that we have is that there's no charge at all ever to the author, which is what defines publishing versus self-publishing or
Right.
vanity publishing to me. A publisher who takes on all that upfront risk. One of the things that distinguishes us from other publishers, more normal publishers, is that we don't pay in advance. Which recognizes that we don't expect huge sales for our books because we don't have the marketing nor the unit cost in printing that allowed for a wide distribution through the distributors like Ingram and other books like that. We're unique this way. Even though we can print 4 books at a time, our cost per book is still higher than when you're printing 2,000 copies minimally on a big web press.
Right.
So we explored going that route of having the occasional book where we would see our way clear to printing 2,000, but I'm no longer interested in that at all. I'm a printer first and foremost, and a typesetter and binder, really. They're having me doing a lot of binding now, which I enjoy a lot. I'm having the best time of my life right now in COVID days, So you just leave me alone in the back room and I just try and crank out everything I can. But back to your question. So there's never a cost to the author. They can pay for books if they want to at the author price. We establish a price for the author for them to buy as many as they want at the author price. Some of our books have broken even because the author bought so many books at the author price. It's strange. Every single one of those 105 books has a different story, how it worked out or didn't quite work out to people.
So the last question was about marketing and and how you spread the word about the book.
Well, okay, locally, and I didn't quite give, because I didn't quote so much from the Gazette, I didn't quite give them their due for helping us build our brand. The Gazette and Steve Farr in particular with Book Bag has been very generous and have covered, virtually almost every title we do comes out from us and other local publishers. So the Gazette plays a big role. They have it in their calendar. They announce where the book launch is. The book launch is the key for us in our marketing efforts. That's where you put all your energy into getting as many people there. Okay, I'm not reluctant to say that those first sales, right, are a lot of people who know the author, care about the author or the subject, and that our powers as marketing geniuses is almost nil. So we go with the heart, do what makes sense, have a great party for the book. We've sold out 2 or 3 cases of books in some of those with 110 people in a small state over, it's different every time. But, and then that generates word of mouth, right? And very little, though we're very willing to have our books in bookstores, we will deliver books for free to Amherst Books, Broadside Books, and BookLink. Those are our chief bookstore outlets that take almost all of our books. The problem is, on a book like that, the surplus is almost usually around $1. Whereas the surplus, when we sell it through our website, and then is that $10. And then, I hate to say it, it's almost the only way we get beyond the valley, again, because we don't go through Ingram or Perseus or any of those distributors. We use Amazon, who take a 22% cut versus the 40% cut that bookstores usually. Those distributors take a 55% cut off of it, and you just can't sell books and have a loss just because you want to do good by your authors. So that's basically the story. It's worked out. It kept us in business. It's kept me with a nice job that I'll enjoy for as long as they'll let me. And it can work out for, because of the model, most authors do not make $5 a book as a royalty. It's much less than that, okay? So if an author is motivated, we work with them. There's a quid pro quo when you have a motivated author. Ed Orzechowski is the chief one that are his You'll Like It Here, the story of one man experience through the Belchertown mental health system up there at Belchertown State School, which and Ed was very motivated. He remains one of our best sellers because he still goes out and still promotes this book. And I haven't done the tally of all the books he sold, but we've paid him thousands of dollars because he's done that. A lot of these authors will go out and sell books, right, as agents of the press and give us the money back, right? Because that way the state gets their due, right?
I have a question. Have you published children's books or poetry books?
We established a poetry imprint in 2011 called Hedgerow Books.
Levelers Press.
We had one of our greatest ever book launches in the Emily Dickinson house for one of our books. It was just the best. But almost all those book launches for the poetry books, because, poets seem to have a lot of friends. I don't know why. And if you can get the sales, they're small books, so they have even a bigger surplus. So, but it's hard. A lot of people don't read poetry, or it's a smaller market. The poetry imprint, Hedgerow Books, is in abeyance right now. We haven't figured out how we're going ahead. We have a reduced staff and no longer can really, I can't pull it off like I used to. So we may go to a new model where we will support the Hedgerow editorial board, which did a lot of vetting of manuscripts. We have reading periods for the Hedgerow books. And we have really top of the line editors, poetry editors that work with us. So it's a big deal, but it's a lot of work. And they kind of expected me to be thoroughly involved with it, and it just was too much in that model. I think it can still work because they're beautiful books together. I want to make a box for all of them at some point, the 11 that we've done so far, then kind of see what happens. We don't do children's books really. The problem there being they have low expectation for retail price and high cost because they're usually oversized color printing.
Yeah.
So the margin is probably, it's generally not there.
Okay. Any other questions?
Okay, we have a question now from Donna. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Donna.
Yeah, it seems to me like your model is in some ways not very different than academic presses that don't give you any kind of money up front. In a sense, a lot of it is based on prestige and maybe you'll get some money out of it. But my question had to do more with what your opinion is of printing on demand, because at least I'm seeing that, you know, people can order a very small number of your book or whoever's book it is. And they, because it's all digitally already set up, they just print out how many copies anybody puts an order in for. And I was just wondering as well, given that kind of a model, how long do you think that things actually stay current or in press these days, given our digital world?
Well, your question brings up a big factor for us in the digital world, where we stand in the digital world. But one of our commitments, like I mentioned at the end, is your book's going to stay in print as long as we're alive. Which, you know, and that means your grandchildren, other people can get that book if they hear about it. It'll still be there. I hope that can continue forever. We have a big space in Amherst. We're hoping we can after all of this. But your question for me brings up our version of print on demand usually is 24 copies. I have a hard time imagining the presses that actually print one book at a time. It just doesn't make sense to me as a printer, so they could be ganging them up somehow. And they give a preferred price, maybe lower than our price we would charge. And there's reasons for that. One, they push you down a very narrow channel for paper and typography when you do a book with, say, Outskirts Press or any of the other self-publishing digital books, okay? And because we live in a printer's valley, I mean, the history of printing, and we in Northampton even, by itself in Northampton, one of the 6 books we published for that series was the history of Paradise Printed and Bound. We want to feel part of that printing community. So back in the offset days when I was working at Commonwealth and Aldebaran, we printed on Mohawk vellum, a really wonderful toothy, we call it vellum stock for books, and we still print on it. They still make it. It's gone way up. It's gone up in price, but because of that 4-out kind of thing, we can actually give people that book still with an ability to mark up the retail price. So that's I want to get better as a printer, keep getting better as a printer and a binder and figuring things out. So I don't know if I answered, if I missed what your real question was. We market the fact that you get a wide choice of papers, a wide choice of format sizes. 6x9 is typical, but we can print 7x10, we can print oblong books, we can print large books now. We now have 3 Versant 180 color machines at 2400 DPI that print color at 80 pages a minute, and they're just unbelievable. And they're all networked, so you can move jobs from one machine to the other. We have 1 in our Florence shop and 2 at our Amherst shop. And it's just we're being hit. Oh, I'm just going crazy here. Did I answer your question?
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions from the audience, please?
I have one, if you don't have anybody online. Off the Common is self-publishing. What kind of business flow are you getting with that, with self-publishing for people coming in?
More than levelers, by a considerable amount these days.
Is there just discretionary decision on your part in terms of what comes into self-publishing, or is it just what we've got this and we'll run with it?
Again, luckily where we are, right, the valley, there's, for some reason, coming across our transom, are very few books that we find objectionable, that we wouldn't help get published. It's just because we have such wonderful people living here that are writers, and there's a community of writers, so that it's like a self-weaning kind of thing comes to us. I don't remember a case where we just refused somebody to have the author come and print, imprint. We have made restrictions in that we want those off-the-comment authors to be a little more serious than you might have for self-publishing, in that we now require at least 100 books printing up front as a thing.
Are you finding that poets are going the off the commonplace, Pedro in advance?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we print for poetry publishers. Again, we're back in the valley where we print the guts our way on Mohawk and Cougar stocks for Ed Rayer up at Swamp Press, who puts letterpress die-cut covers on them, and the Slate Roof Poetry Collective publishes their books that way in an affordable hybrid of print, which I enjoy doing like crazy. Ed and I work together at Commonwealth.
What is the difference between the self-publishing and the publishing that you do at Levelers?
Well, one, we don't do active promotion of the book. We're supportive of stuff that those authors might want to come up with. But the other one that we do, it's everything like Levelers in a way, because we'll list it on our website. We can represent them on Amazon if they want. But all of it is a charge to the customer.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being with us. And I have a gift for you from the Amherst Women's Club. Think of us when you have your morning coffee or tea.
I'll do that.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Take good care. Bye-bye. All right, are we turned on? That was so interesting.